Hello, everyone. Welcome to What's All the ERP Buzz. It's our monthly chat series that we have every second Tuesday of the month at 4 p.m. So excited that you're here this week to join us. Today, we're talking all about staying compliant all year round. And let's talk about non-compliance because that brings up many risks like data loss, security breaches, lost customers, financial fines and penalties. And Greenshades is here to discuss everything you need to consider in preparation for year end to remain compliant. So I'm so excited for our guests this month. We have Alicia Rocks at the tax product manager at Greenshades. We have Mary Kautzman, the compliance officer at Greenshades. And then we have Mark Moschetto, the HR and payroll expert from Kick Motor. So excited you're here to join me this month. Thanks everyone for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So I'm so excited for you to talk about compliance and year end, because as we know, that's two main things that everybody has on their mind lately. So I will let you guys take it away.
Awesome. Thank you. And it's such a timely topic, right? Because, I think a lot of organizations year end is when you're going through that closing process and kind of getting ready for your filings. And you have that like, I missed what, right? You have that like sinking feeling in your gut. So, Mary, you are the compliance guru and expert. How do we stay ahead of that during the course of the year so we can avoid, having to do the late night CBS run for Tums to contend with all this stuff?
Absolutely. Now, I used to do individual taxes, so it's kind of interesting because everybody always waits until April 14th to get that April 15th deadline.
Never done that. I don't know what you're talking about.
Paper compliance is 100% different because it is year round. You've got to keep up with it. And it's exactly like he was saying, year end is the time when the problems come up, but the sooner you discover them, the faster you can fix them. And it saves you time, it saves you money, it saves you grief. Whenever I think about compliance, there's so much out there. It's just unbelievable the amount of information that you need. And of course, we use computers as a tool, but there's still a human component here that we all have to keep up on. So, Alicia, do you have anything to tell us about the Greenshades process?
Yeah, I think you and I work really well together in trying to help keep our Greenshades products compliant, right? Because on your side of the product, you're looking into the laws and the things that we on the product side need to help implement with our clients. And so trying to make a good user experience that clients can understand that answers some of their basic tax questions is very helpful, I think, to the people that use our product, because we do offer support for anyone who has questions about how to use our product, but also we can provide links of information that may help them in making a decision about whether to make a or B choice when it comes to their taxes.
Yeah. And I think, piggybacking on that, one of the other things I think that Greenshades does a really good job about, if you're watching this live, as opposed to a recording, we're kind of in the middle of this year-end forms informational webinar series. And, y'all are always doing webinars and white papers and blog posts that help people to kind of keep up with it, even if they're not clients. But from the client perspective, I think, Mary, you mentioned, no matter how much you try to electronify, is that a word? I don't know. Automate. There's still the human element, and so much of what Greenshades does is help to kind of bake those types of checks and balances, and from the moment an employee joins and kind of signs up in their paperwork, making sure that the information is accurate. Like, we try to automate a lot of that, so we do take those opportunities for human error out of the loop as much as possible. Maybe you guys can just talk about that a little bit. Like, what are some of the ways that we do it? And, what does that feedback loop look like, Mary, where, you're kind of on the front line tracking, God bless you, tracking all of these things that are going on in the world of IRS and DOR. And then Alicia is kind of on the product end of that, making sure that all gets put in there. So talk about that a little bit.
I always like to think of it as like, the technology changed, like when it used to all be on paper and pencil, which even back then it was a workload to keep up with stuff. But as time has gone on, there's so many changes. Computers have helped, but they're also made it more difficult because now the IRS can analyze the same data and they're finding stuff faster and more often than before. So, so we don't have paper forms where there's a person going through their stack, which, I'm not saying that. So it's more important to find out things before you can, once again, so you can take corrective action.
Yeah. And I think getting those checks and balances into our product is important too, because then we're able to catch those things before the IRS does, right? So we can throw warnings when we say, hey, you're reporting wages, but there was no tax withheld. That's kind of a red flag that usually if somebody's going to file a withholding return, they expect to have some kind of withholding to report. So that's how we try to manage those kinds of concerns from the product side, is we're looking for those red flags that are coming back from the IRS saying, hey, this file failed for some reason. And then we're taking actions on the product side to help prevent that going forward, so the next person doesn't run into that issue.
Nice.
And I also would like to say one thing about being part of a team with Greenshades is that we can get information from not only the state agencies and the IRS, but we also get it from our customers. They're a great source. I'd like to say, as compliance, who's dealt with the IRS, I can honestly say I've been in it for over 20 years and nothing surprises me anymore. It's just amazing how you'd think that every possible mistake could have been made by now, but the littlest thing, and it just like, it's like a house of cards and the whole thing just comes tumbling down. So I don't want to be I want to do a cautionary tale because I don't want people to be like, oh my gosh, I have to be afraid of this and this and this. But, as we were talking about, it does come up. You do your filings semi-weekly, monthly, quarterly, and then at the end of the year, it all has to come together and match up. So, once again, I can't stress it enough. The sooner you can find the mistakes, the easier they are to fix. And also the changes are just amazing. I'm going to tell you a story about Alicia. I don't know if you remember back in the first quarter, which ended March 31st, and then they had till April 30th. There was one state, and I can't remember exactly which state, but all the legislatures were in session. They changed everything after half of the people had already filed. Like they changed the rate of the unemployment.
I don't remember what state that was either, but you're right. Somebody did do that.
And it was almost, we had to be right on top of that to get that back into, because, of course they sent it out, which especially that time of year, you may have hundreds of emails. I can say sometimes, the emails, you just miss little things. And if you would have missed that, it was like not a big deal, but the way that they handled it was, sit tight, don't do anything, and correct it the next quarter. But for people who hadn't filed yet, obviously it was much easier to run it again and get the correct numbers in. So you didn't have to worry about that, another adjustment the next quarter. So that was one situation where, fast action definitely can help the corrections.
Yeah,
Yep. I know the COVID changes also were really big on us as well. It seemed like every quarter we were getting a new update for the quarterly 941 to do with the COVID changes. And I think a lot of people don't realize how those kinds of things affect your taxes, right? Like, who in their right mind would have thought everybody's on lockdown? The first thing on my mind is let's correct our 941 to include COVID rates, right? But that was something that we had to work through. And my my developers and I, working from home, or cross notes with Mary saying, is this the way that we're supposed to do that? What about in this situation? We have test cases that we have to walk through. So I think it is very interesting, all of the different things that happen out there in the world and how they actually affect your taxes that you wouldn't consider as well.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, like, the curveballs are what make life a little interesting. So things change mid-session post filings, right? I think midway this year they upped the reimbursement amount for mileage. COVID related, how many people moved, how many people changed addresses during the pandemic? I think Sherm had a stat that, like, of the people that moved, only a third reported that move into HR. And with, like, federal, okay, federal, but then there's like state, and depending on where you live, there could be city or county specific regulations. Like that's
Yeah,
a lot.
it
So
is.
how can people avoid that impending challenge? Like how do they get ahead of it?
Once again, it does come down to record keeping and keeping up with the suggestions that they have. But, once again, just to give you an example of how it can affect your filings, if you were assuming that somebody was working in state A, I'm just going to use South Carolina as an example, and then you found out a few months later that they were actually working in North Carolina, if you can make the correction before the end of the quarter, it's a little bit easier. The longer you wait, all of a sudden, once you find out what state the money should have went to, now you're going to be delinquent there and rack up fees. And then also you could use the credit on the state that it shouldn't have been in to reduce so that your books balance out okay. But there's always that little bit of lag time in between, which once again, the state that's missing the money is going to may I'm not going to say they will, but they may charge you the delinquency fees and the interest on that, and they don't care that it was actually somewhere else and it was just a little mistake. So getting those corrections, and once again, if you wait till the end of the year and then you file the W-2s, now you've got to go back and correct all of those federal and state. So it's a lot to do all at one time.
It is, yeah. And you bring up a good point that when the end of the year comes around, if you haven't made those corrections in your ERP, when the end of the year comes around, nobody's going to remember what they did in first quarter to write a void or correct this person's paycheck. So it's definitely better to keep up with those changes throughout the year when you're actually addressing them, so that when the end of the year comes, you don't have to remember those situations.
And I think another thing that COVID really did for employers is it was in a way a burden, because now that people are spread, it was a little bit, but it was widespread, where now it's a big blanket where you were covered. You used to have fewer states to work with, but now you're all over the place. And then when you have employees that move to a state that you've never filed in, it does become a interesting situation to say the least with the filings.
That's very true.
Yeah. And what happens in this is like a bit of a rookie question when it comes to this sort of stuff, but when those penalties kick in, right, and when those challenges happen, does it stop at the employer, or does that telegraph through to the employee? Like, are there wage or tax implications for them if those things get missed?
I can tell you once again, as when the employee has to file the taxes at the end of the year, if you miss it and filed into the wrong state, for the employee, it's going to owe to the state that they should have, their resident state where they should have been. So they're going to have to come up with the money to pay the taxes to them. They will get the money refunded from the incorrect state, but number one, they're going to have to pay for a tax return, which even if you do it yourself on TurboTax, each state is at least $50.
Yeah.
So that's an expense that they have, but plus the time factor, because now they, in some cases, like they have to wait for the refund to come, so they have the money to pay the new state. So if they miss that deadline, it can cost employees, which once again does add to dissatisfaction and frustration over, once again, if you can catch it before those W-2s went out, it's a bit easier.
It's true. Yeah. And I'll make a little plug for Greenshades on that as well, that our products give you the opportunity for employees to put in that they have a new address and then send that information to the HR admin so that they can review it, make the appropriate adjustments, whether it be to taxes or other paperwork. And I think having something like that in place for your company, especially if you have a significant number of employees to keep track of, I think that is very helpful.
Definitely. And I think it's, it's so important to recognize that there's cascading negative impacts of non-compliance, right? And
true.
If you go to the Greenshades website and look at the resources section, we've done actually a lot of content and webinars on this recently, but a lot of employees now are living paycheck to paycheck, even relatively high earners, right? So if you think about there was an error made and you've got to come up with funds that you didn't have, and even if you might be getting it refunded elsewhere, like that's a bump. And then I work with other organizations around recruiting and retention challenges. And anything you do to damage that employer brand, right, that makes people think a little less rosy about the company who's cutting their check, social media and word of mouth and everything else like that gets amplified. And that's a real, it's a testament to how critically important and strategic payroll and compliance folks are within their organization, right? Because no one goes home every 2 weeks and goes, my paycheck was right.
That's right. Only when it's wrong.
Boy, everyone knows when it's off by a couple of bucks, right? So
That's true.
no, I think it's important. What are some of the other strategies? Like, again, I know that the Greenshades does a lot of communication out to the marketplace in general on what's going on. From a product or from a compliance, just a general compliancy rule standpoint, like what are some of the best practices you can share with the folks who are listening that will help them stay on the right side of compliance?
I would say definitely, once again, just keep up with it. Make sure you do reconciliations quarterly before you get to the end of because at time is the factor with corrections. A really important thing for employers is that, when an error is made, a lot of times when even if you report it or correct it, now the state's going to be looking at your account. So there's like a little caveat with IRS audits that just because you got away with it once doesn't mean that it's okay. And, once they start looking at your records, they can go back a year, and if it can cascade pretty quickly. So you always want to be up, I say up to date as much as you can, and make it as easy as you can. That's why Greenshades is so good, because, we do stay on top of it.
Yeah. And I think having copies of everything on hand is very helpful when you go through those audits as well, because having electronic things are handy, but if you can't get to them in a timely manner, then that's not going to do you any good. Having them in a safe location, wherever that may be for your company, I think is very important. And then that way, if you do get audited, you have a central place to go back to that they can find all of those records. And then that way, when you have somebody who leaves the company, they don't have all that stuff stored and saved on their own machine. It's well organized. I think that's the best practice.
And that's actually another great feature of Greenshades that I love, is that the reports are, you can get so many different reports so that you can do the double checking without getting a calculator or adding. So, you can run the reports, make the corrections, run them again. And, now you've got it checked, done for the quarter next.
And people can archive their annual forms with us too, so that they can go back and look at those, or have their employees pull them up on our Green Employee website directly if they need access.
Yeah. And I think too, another point in that is the centralization of information too, right? Because we've also seen, as a result of COVID, like that definition of the deskless employee has really expanded in recent years, right? Like it's not just the home healthcare professionals and folks that are in the field like that. Like you can almost consider anyone that's doing a work from home or a hybrid, like you've got to be able to meet them where they're at, right? So from a tax policy standpoint and the way each employer deals with it, it's having a centralized place where, whether you're sitting in the office, in the field, or at home, you can go to that updated employee handbook. You can, access the forms. And if you can't do it directly online, you can at least have that how-to that everyone, no matter where they are in the workplace, has access to it, right? Is that something you see from a product standpoint, taking a front seat?
Yeah, I would say if we had some other of our product managers on here, they would definitely have a lot to say on that. Our employee services product manager in particular, I can hear her screaming in my head right now just at the question. But delighting employees is something that we talk about a lot here at Greenshades. We want our customers to be happy, and we want their employees to be happy. If an admin is logging in to do whatever they may need to, whether it's to update HR information, pay their quarterly taxes, whatever it may be, and they aren't able to get information to their employees in a way that is useful and timely, and their employees can't log into their portal and get that information or be able to pass information to HR, then what's the point in having a product, right? We need things that are helpful to the industry, and we need things that are going to provide value to the people that are purchasing them. So I think Our platform is doing a really great job of that. We try to get as much customer feedback. We send out surveys on a pretty regular basis, and we dig through them. And that's something that I appreciate about working at Greenshades, is that we are passionate about making our clients happy. It's not just about pushing out a product into the industry to get our hand in the market, right? Like, we're trying to provide value to the people that are coming to us, and I think that we do a good job of that.
Definitely. Awesome.
I don't know if you want to throw anything in, Mary.
No, absolutely. I too, like, I don't see as many clients as, I don't have interfacing, but I do
Sure.
always just think about, not only the employers, but the employees, because they are our neighbors, they're our friends, they're our family, and, they need their paychecks. So that's who I always think about whenever I'm doing my job. So, definitely appreciate the accessibility of it. It makes it easier. Like I said, one thing you want is just you want confidence, and just, that doesn't mean that you can sit back and do nothing, but it definitely means you don't have to go to sleep worrying, oh, I forgot this, oh, I forgot that. That's what having a
peace
team
of mind.
Yes.
That's right.
And also, like, the HR and payroll teams are employees too, right? Like,
Yeah,
I mean,
they are.
there's, I feel like, this amazing group of people always gets kind of lost in these discussions, because it's like, how do we make things easier for the employees, and how do we make it more engaging? And it's like, I'm an employee too. Like, these sorts of tools really help me to sleep better at night, or,
It's
to
true.
spend less time, I'm not doing phone interviews or manually entering information every time an employee has a specific challenge around a life event that they
Yeah.
need to record, or things like that, right? You can do that all right in product.
Mhm.
It all kind of streamlines all the way through, through HR, and right through to the payroll process and the withholding process. And as a result, like, HR and payroll pros can spend more time doing more strategic things, right? It's a big
That's
part
true.
of it.
Yeah, it allows us more time to be researching the industry rather than trying to figure out what issues that our clients are running into. If we can be more strategic in that, I think that is the right way to go, for sure.
Nice. Any other pearls of wisdom? Or Amy, do you have anything you want to jump in on the discussion with?
Well, I was just going to say Greenshades does do an amazing job of getting content out there, educating everybody on compliance. And I totally agree that, happy employees help, because we all know every time I always see on LinkedIn, someone's got a new job and everybody's moving on to somewhere else. It's kind of crazy right now.
Yeah.
So if you can make your employees happy, that's one step ahead of everybody else in the world. And having things at your fingertips, like you should giving your employees more autonomy to make those changes, so that saves everybody time in the long run. So yeah, I like everything you guys touched upon. It was very informative. I'm sure compliance is going to be a never-ending discussion for anybody. And I thank you again for joining me today. Feel free to share any last thoughts before we wrap up.
I'll bring it together just from a compliance point of view, is that, we talked about staying on top of things, which sometimes the horse is out of the barn. So if you have an issue, it's not too late to correct it before the year end. And then, once again, move forward and learn from, keep those corrections going, and it will be great.
Yes.
Yeah. And the only thing I would add to that is just make sure, like we discussed during this call, that you're keeping up with the changes and edits that you need to make throughout the year to make your year-end process a lot more smoother. It'll save a lot of stress.
Yeah. And then my thing is, I just think that compliance really should be a company-wide mindset, not just isolated to the HR and payroll department too, right? Like, I spend a lot of my time with marketing teams. We've got privacy concerns, GDPR, can spam. Like, there's a lot of things that we need to be aware of to stay on the right side of compliancy too. And I'm sure there's examples in every discipline within a business. So, for any of the C-level execs and founders and business owners out there that are listening to it, I think that the more you can instill a compliance first mindset as part of the business, everyone will kind of have that foremost in their mind and will rise to the occasion. You'll probably see less instances of being on the wrong side of compliance, because as Mary pointed out, that is not fun, especially when you're dealing with certain agencies.
It can be expensive.
Yes, fines and penalties.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining me this month for the monthly chat series. I really, truly appreciate it. And thanks everyone for joining us this time around, and stay tuned for next month. So thanks everyone.
Thank you. Bye all.
Bye-bye.